You open your cupboard tonight, and it's nearly empty. A little flour, some onions going soft in the corner, maybe a can of something you forgot you had. And that quiet worry creeps in, the one that asks how you're supposed to make a real dinner out of almost nothing. Here's the truth I want to hand you. There were families who fed 6 people a hot, filling supper on what you'd throw in the trash today. Not once. Every single night. For years. And they didn't feel poor while they did it. That knowledge came straight out of the hardest stretch this country ever lived through, the 1930s, when a third of the nation went hungry and learned to cook in ways we've almost completely forgotten. By the end of this, I'm going to tell you about a dinner developed inside a university laboratory in 1933, a recipe so cheap and so clever that a young couple served it at their own wedding feast. It cost almost nothing, and I'll show you how to make it in your own kitchen this weekend. I still remember my grandmother's kitchen table, the yellow one with the chip on the corner, and the way she'd pour hot milk over torn bread and call it supper like she was handing me gold. I laughed at it as a boy. I'm not laughing now, so let me start where she started, with bread and a little milk. Milk toast. That was the first Depression dinner I ever ate, though I didn't know that's what it was. You take stale bread, and stale is important. You toast it dark, you tear it into a bowl, and you pour hot milk over it with a little butter, a pinch of salt, sometimes a spoon of sugar. That's it. That was dinner for millions of children in 1932. It filled a belly for about 2 cents a serving. My grandmother said her mother made it on the nights the money ran out before the week did, which back then was most nights. Now here's what surprised me when I finally tried it as a grown man during a rough winter. It works. It's warm, it sits heavy, and it stops the gnawing. But milk toast was only the doorway. Because once you understand that stale bread is not garbage, but the base of a dozen suppers, a whole world opens up. Take that same hard bread and you've got the beginning of a bread and onion soup, the kind poor families across the Midwest lived on. You brown onions slow in a little grease, until they go sweet and gold. You add water, not broth, just water and salt. And you lay the stale bread in the bottom of the bowl to soak it all up. In 1896, the fancy version needed beef stock. By 1933, the water version fed whole neighborhoods, and folks swore they couldn't tell the difference once the onions did their work. But bread had an even greater trick, and it was the one that kept people alive. They called it the everlasting bread pudding, or in some houses just poor man's pudding. Every scrap of bread that couldn't be eaten went into a crock. Heels, crusts, the dry middle, even broken crackers. When the crock was full, you soaked it all in milk or even just water with a little sugar and a beaten egg if you were lucky enough to have one, and you baked it into a dense, sweet pudding that felt like a treat. Nothing was thrown away. Nothing. A loaf of bread in that era did the work of 3 loaves today, and that is the first thing we lost, because somewhere along the way, somebody taught us that stale bread is trash, and I want you to sit with how strange that is. Our great-grandparents would have been horrified to watch us toss a hardened loaf in the bin. To them, that loaf was tomorrow's breakfast and tomorrow's supper both. So that's bread. Therefore, let me take you to the thing that hung on the wall of nearly every poor kitchen in America, the thing that turned a few cents into a meal that stuck to your ribs, the potato. There was a dish so common in the 1930s it earned its own name, and folks just called it the poor man's meal. You take a couple of potatoes, dice them up, dice 1 onion, and fry them together in a pan. If you had a single hot dog, and hot dogs were cheap even then, you'd slice it thin, and mix it right in so a nickel's worth of meat flavored the whole pan. That fed a working man for the day. One skillet, maybe 8 cents, and people ate it with something close to gratitude. But the potato went so much further than that. There was potato soup, of course, just potatoes, onion, water, and a splash of milk. But the trick nobody remembers is what they did with the water. When you boiled your potatoes, you never poured that water down the drain, you saved it. That starchy water thickened soups, it stretched gravies, and it even went into bread to make it rise softer. Every drop carried food value, and they knew it. Then there were potato pancakes made from the leftovers, grated and fried flat and crisp. There was the potato and flour dumpling dropped into thin broth to make it a full meal. And in the poorest homes, when there was truly nothing else, there was the fried potato peel, the skins seasoned with salt and crisped in a little fat, because even the peel had calories, and they refused to waste a single one. Now I'll be honest with you. When I first read about people eating potato peels, I felt sorry for them. I thought how desperate, how sad. But then I made them one night, half as a joke, and they came out like the best chip I'd ever had, and it hit me that I had been throwing away food that was actually delicious. The sadness I felt wasn't for them. It was for how much I'd wasted my whole life without ever knowing it. Somebody profited from us forgetting all this. Think about it. Every dish I've named so far costs pennies and comes from your own hands. There's no brand on it, no package. Nobody makes money when you tear up your own stale bread and pour hot milk on it. Nobody earns a dime when you save your potato water. The moment we were taught to see this food as shameful, as something only poor and pitiful people ate, that was the moment we started handing our grocery money to companies who sold us the exact same potato, the exact same bread, marked up 10 times and wrapped in plastic. Our grandparents fed themselves. We pay to be fed. And the difference between those two things is most of the money that leaves your pocket every single week. But it goes deeper than potatoes and bread, because the Depression cook had a genius I did not expect. They could make food taste like food they didn't even have. Let me tell you about the mock dishes, and these are the ones that truly stunned me. There was mock apple pie, and there wasn't a single apple in it. In 1934, the recipe went out on the side of a cracker box, and it called for broken crackers, water, sugar, a little cream of tartar for tartness, and cinnamon. You baked it in a crust, and the crackers softened, and the spices did their magic, and grown men who grew up on real apple pie could not tell the difference. Whole families were fooled at the dinner table. It cost a fraction of what apples cost, and it gave children a slice of pie in a year when pie should have been impossible. There was mock oyster stew made from cooked down celery hearts and salt because it fooled the tongue into tasting the sea. There was mock chicken, little skewers of pork and veal, or in the poorest kitchens just seasoned bread and onion, shaped and fried to feel like the real thing. There was even a mock hamburger stretched with so much oatmeal and onion that one small handful of ground meat fed the whole table. And then there was water pie. Now stay with me, because this one sounds impossible. It is a pie made of water. You pour water into a crust, you add sugar, flour, butter, and a little vanilla, and as it bakes it sets into a sweet, custardy filling that tastes like something rich and buttery. A dessert made from water. In 1930 and 31, when a family had a little flour and sugar but no fruit, no eggs, no milk, water pie put a dessert on the table anyway. Vinegar pie worked the same trick, using a spoon of vinegar to fake the tang of lemon in a year when lemons were a luxury nobody could afford. And that tells you everything about these people. They didn't just survive. They insisted on a little sweetness at the end of a hard day, and they built it out of thin air. Now here's where I need to talk to you directly, because I know exactly who's listening right now. Maybe you're thinking all of this is fine for somebody with a big kitchen, a garden, a deep pantry, and hours to spend. Maybe you live in a small apartment. Maybe it's just you, or you and one other person, on a fixed check that never seems to stretch to the end of the month. Maybe you don't have the strength to be canning and baking all day. I want you to hear me clearly. This next part is built for exactly you, and it's the part I wish somebody had handed me 20 years ago. Because the single most powerful depression dinner needs nothing but a pot, a spoon, and a burner. They called it the perpetual soup, or the everlasting pot, and it was the quiet secret of surviving a whole winter. Here's how it works. You start a pot of soup on a Monday. Anything you have. An onion, a potato, a handful of beans, a little salt. You eat what you need that night. But you do not empty the pot, and you do not throw anything away. The next day, whatever scraps you generate, the end of a carrot, the outer leaf of a cabbage, a bone, the water you boiled something else in, it all goes into the pot. You add a little water. You bring it back to a boil each day, and that daily boil is what keeps it safe. The soup is never the same twice, and it never runs out, and it costs almost nothing to keep alive because it feeds on the scraps you'd otherwise throw away. Families kept a pot like this going for weeks. Some old-timers claimed months. And the beautiful thing is you don't need land, you don't need money, you don't need to can a single jar. You need one pot and the decision to stop throwing food away. You can start yours tonight with whatever is soft and sad in your refrigerator right now. The vegetables you were about to toss, that's not garbage. That's Tuesday's dinner. And while that pot simmers, let me give you the cheapest protein trick the era ever produced, because a small home on a tight budget needs cheap protein most of all, dried beans, but not the way you think. The Depression cook knew that a single pound of dried beans, which cost about 5 cents then and still costs less than $1 today, made nearly 10 cups of cooked beans. 10 cups from one bag. They cooked them with an onion and whatever scrap of fat they had, and that pot of beans became the base of a dozen different suppers, so the family never got bored. Monday it was soup, Tuesday it was mashed onto bread, Wednesday it was fried into little cakes. Thursday it was baked with a spoon of molasses and called Boston style. Same beans, same pennies, a week of dinners. And that feeling, that quiet anger at all the years lost, only grew stronger the deeper I dug. But before I show you exactly where that trail leads, I want to tell you about something I put together for people who felt exactly what you're feeling right now. Everything I'm sharing with you in this video, and a whole lot more that we'll never have time to cover here, is gathered together in my book, Depression Kitchen. It's a complete guide to cooking the way our great-grandparents cooked, with real recipes, real history, and real numbers showing you what each meal costs. If you want all of this in one place, written out so you can take it into your own kitchen tonight, Depression Kitchen is linked in the description below. It was built for exactly the person sitting where you're sitting right now. Now let's follow that trail, because here is where the story turns. Add a nickel bag of cornmeal and you had cornbread, or you had fried cornmeal mush, which is nothing more than thick cornmeal porridge, chilled overnight until it sets firm, then sliced and fried in the morning until crisp. Beans and cornbread fed the American South through the entire decade, and doctors will tell you now that the combination gives you a complete protein, everything your body needs. Poor families stumbled onto perfect nutrition by pure necessity, and they did it for pennies a day. So no more telling yourself this doesn't apply to you. A pot of soup that never dies, a bag of beans that becomes a week of meals, and a bag of cornmeal. That is $3 or $4, and it is more real food security than most people with full pantries have today. But I promised you something at the very beginning, and I keep my promises. I promised you a dinner born inside a laboratory, a dinner so cheap and so clever that a young couple served it at their own wedding, and this is the one almost nobody alive remembers, so let me hand it to you now. In 1933, at Cornell University in New York, two women in the home economics department set out to solve an impossible problem. Their names were Flora Rose and Martha Van Rensselaer, and they were watching families across the state try to feed their children on almost no money and no meat. They knew that milk and corn were two of the cheapest, most available foods in America. So in their laboratory they created a mixture, and they gave it a plain name. They called it Milcorno. It was nothing more than cornmeal, powdered skim milk, and a little salt, blended together in exact proportions so that the cheapest possible ingredients delivered the most possible nutrition. You cooked it like a porridge. You could eat it soft for breakfast, or let it set and fry it for dinner, or build a whole meal around it. It cost, by their own published figures, roughly a penny or two per serving, and it kept children from going hungry when there was nothing else. Now here is the part that gave me chills when I found it. In 1933, a Cornell graduate named Ruth, a young woman who had learned about this humble food, chose to build her entire wedding dinner around Milcorno dishes to prove to the whole country that you could eat with dignity, even joy, on almost nothing. The story ran in the papers, a wedding feast, celebrated and photographed, built on a food that cost pennies. She wasn't ashamed of it. She was proud of it. She served it to her guests as if to say, this is not poverty food, this is smart food, and there's honor in feeding people well for almost nothing. That is the knowledge that got buried. The mixture existed. It was proven in a real laboratory by real scientists. It fed real families through the worst years this country ever saw. And then, as the good times returned, it quietly disappeared, because a food you can mix at home for 2 cents makes nobody rich. But you can make it this weekend, and here is exactly how. Take 1 cup of cornmeal and blend it with about 1/3 of a cup of powdered milk and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. That's your Milcorno mix, and you can make a big batch and keep it in a jar. To cook it, whisk about 1 cup of the mix slowly into 4 cups of boiling water and stir it over low heat until it thickens, 10 minutes or so. Eat it hot with a little butter or a drizzle of syrup for breakfast. Or pour the thickened porridge into a loaf pan, chill it overnight until it's firm as a brick, slice it, and fry the slices in a hot pan until they're golden and crisp. Salt them and they're a savory dinner. Dust them with sugar and cinnamon and they're a dessert. 1 serving costs you pennies. It's filling, it's got the protein of the milk and the energy of the corn, and it comes from a real recipe that a real university handed to desperate families in 1933. You are now holding knowledge that was created to keep people alive and then allowed to fade away. It's yours now, and that's the whole point of everything I've shared with you tonight. These weren't sad meals eaten by defeated people. Milk toast, the poor man's meal, water pie, mock apple pie, the everlasting soup pot, a bag of beans, and a jar of Milcorno. These were the tools of people who refused to be beaten, who fed their families with pride when the whole world told them they had nothing. That knowledge didn't vanish by accident. It faded because a self-reliant kitchen is a kitchen that doesn't need to buy much, and there's no profit in that. You just took a piece of it back. You are the kind of person who suspects, deep down, that the old ways were quietly set aside not because they stopped working, but because somebody found a way to sell you what your own grandmother used to make for free. And you're right to think that. So let me ask you something, and I really want you to answer me. Of everything I laid out tonight, which dish did your own family make? Was it the fried cornmeal mush, the potato and onion skillet, the milk toast poured over torn bread? Or is one of these completely new to you? Tell me down in the comments. I read them, and I learn as much from your family's memories as you learn from mine. Don't just think it, write it down for me. And if you feel that pull, that sense that this old knowledge matters and shouldn't be lost again, then come along with the rest of us who are quietly gathering it back up, one forgotten recipe at a time. Because next time, I'm going to show you the one ingredient nearly every Depression family kept in a tin by the stove, the cheap thing they added to almost everything that we've been taught to fear and throw away. You'll want to hear what it really was and why they trusted it with their lives. Now, before you go, let me sit with you a little longer, because there are more of these dinners, and I don't want a single one to slip away. Let me tell you about the dandelion. When spring came and the winter stores ran low, in that hungry stretch they called the lean months, poor families walked out into the fields and yards and gathered dandelion greens by the basketful. Free food, growing wild, that most people today spray with poison and curse at. They boiled the young leaves and dressed them with a little hot bacon grease and a splash of vinegar, and that wilted dandelion salad wasn't just filling, it was packed with vitamins their winter diet had been missing. In 1933, a family could gather a full meal's worth of greens in an afternoon without spending a cent. The old-timers even fried the flower heads and roasted the roots to make a coffee substitute when real coffee was a distant memory. And speaking of stretching what little you had, let me tell you about creamed chipped beef on toast. Now, the soldiers had a rough name for it, but in the Depression kitchen, it was a treasure. You took a small amount of dried, salted beef, the cheapest cut of preserved meat there was, and you tore it into a white sauce made of flour, a little fat, and milk or even just water. Then you spooned that over toast. A few ounces of the cheapest meat in the store flavored a gravy that covered enough toast to feed the whole table. That was Sunday special in a lot of homes, the closest thing to a luxury they got, and it cost almost nothing. There was also the humble onion sandwich. And I know how that sounds. A thick slice of raw or fried onion between two pieces of bread with a little butter or a smear of drippings. That was lunch for grown men doing hard labor. James Beard, who became one of the most famous cooks in America, wrote fondly about the onion sandwich his whole life, and he grew up learning to love simple food. If it was good enough to be remembered by a master, it's good enough for our table. Then came the ways they stretched a single egg. When eggs were scarce, a cook would beat one egg into a whole bowl of flour and water to make a pan of egg noodles that fed everyone, so that one egg carried a whole dinner. Or they made what some called a Dutch baby, one egg whipped with flour and milk and baked in a hot pan until it puffed up huge and golden, then torn apart and shared. One egg, feeding a family, because they understood that an egg is a binder and a stretcher, not just something you fry by itself and waste on one person. And I haven't even told you about the great pot of Hoover stew. They named it, with a bitter kind of humor, after the president they blamed for the hard times. It was whatever you had, thrown into one pot, usually macaroni, because it was cheap and filling, plus a can of tomatoes, some sliced hot dogs if you had them, and any vegetable in the house, most often corn or beans. It simmered into a thick, hearty stew that could feed a big family and stretch across 2 or 3 days. In the shanty towns they called Hoovervilles, Whole communities pooled what little they had into one giant pot of this stew so that nobody in the camp went to bed empty. That's a picture I never forget. People with almost nothing, cooking together so that everyone ate. There was liver and onions, because the organ meats were the cheapest cuts at the butcher, the parts the wealthy turned their noses up at, and they turned out to be some of the most nourishing food a person could eat. There was scrapple, born among the Pennsylvania Dutch, where every last bit of the pig was simmered down, mixed with cornmeal, set firm, sliced, and fried, so that not one scrap of a hard-won animal was ever wasted. There was the tomato gravy poured over biscuits when a can of tomatoes and a little flour became a full breakfast, and there was ketchup soup, hot water stirred with ketchup and any seasoning on hand, which sounds like nothing at all until you remember it kept people warm and fed on the very worst nights, the nights when there was truly nothing else in the house. Every one of these dishes tells the same story. Waste nothing, fear nothing, feed everyone. Use the cheap cut, the wild green, the stale loaf, the single egg, the scrap you are about to throw out, and turn it into something that fills a belly and warms a heart. I spent most of my life thinking my grandmother's food was the food of people who'd lost. I understand now that it was the food of people who won, who kept their families alive and their heads high through years that would break most of us today. She wasn't ashamed of that yellow table and that bowl of milk toast. She was trying to hand me a lifeline, and I was too proud and too comfortable to take it. I'm taking it now, and I just handed it to you. So start that everlasting pot tonight. Mix up a jar of milcorno this weekend. Save your potato water and your bread heels and your onion skins. Cook a pound of beans and turn it into a week. And the next time your cupboard looks bare and that old worry creeps in, you remember that you know something now that most people have completely forgotten. You know how to eat like a survivor. Tell me in the comments which one you're going to try first. Come back and let me know how the water pie turns out, because I promise you won't believe it until you taste it. And stay close, because there's a whole world of this knowledge left to recover, and I'm not stopping until we've got all of it back. If your cupboard tonight looks a little like the ones I described, I'd love for you to stay close. Down in the hard times circle, I pick up right where this video stopped. Ask me your own question and a real person answers me. You belong with the thrifty folks already inside. Point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. Cancel anytime with one click.